Greetings and welcome to the Monster Prophecy. To avoid any confusion, this is part 2 and the continuation of the elf, dwarf and werewolf story that I uploaded 6 days ago. However, this video also contains extremely important lore regarding the Curse of the Werewolf series. If for whatever reason there isn't a wide appeal for the series anymore, I will put it on hiatus and continue uploading other stories and new horror series. Therefore, for those of you who do want the series to continue, please do comment below. From the origin of vampires to special class werewolves and the battle between heaven and hell, this video is a deep dive storytelling lore breakdown explaining the plot for the fantasy horror world that I created. I hope you enjoy. Chapter 6. Ragnar lives in. The elf and dwarf stood back to back. Berthold faced the direction of blood-thirsty vampires, while Eleanor faced this monstrosity walking towards her. Ragnar, the white wolf, walked slowly and carefully, but the carefulness did not stem from fear. The strong winds ruffled his white fur, unable to blow away his stoic expression. The elf lord grabbed an arrow from her quiver and readied it. However, in Eleanor's long elvish life of being the best archer that ever graced the earth, her hands trembled. Berthold was unaware of her actions, for he was dealing with a horde of hesitant vampire creatures in front. Ragnar walked towards Eleanor, completely shunning the vampires in Cascada like they weren't formidable enough to even look at. When he reached the elf lord, he bent forward, pressing his forehead against the cold steel arrowhead. And then he spoke.
"Aim for the head, she-elf,"
he said.
"Try and put me out of my misery."
The elf dropped her bow while the arrow fell to the ground clumsily, a trait that wasn't shared with elves. "No, it cannot be," she says, her expression petrified. Berthold said, "He's a friend, she-elf." "I will explain." However, Berthold's sentence was cut off, for Eleanor said, "You're a special class werewolf." Ragnar and Berthold frowned. When the vampires grew impatient, their foolish naivety allowed them to take a few steps forward. But the white wolf growled as his red eyes seemed to glow. His aura emanated immense pressure, almost a suffocating feeling pressing down on their shoulders. These vampires hid from him when he was a human, a warrior knight taking monster contracts and fighting in battles. If they feared their chances of survival back then, what could they possibly do now? With their sharp fangs and long fingernails, they backed away completely, allowing the elf, dwarf and werewolf to walk out the city of Cascada. Then the trio made their way back to the forest. It was midnight and the elf and dwarf had almost met their demise. A little time to reflect and calm their nerves wouldn't hurt anyone. More so with Ragnar at their side, no creature human-like or supernatural would be dumb enough to approach them. Thankfully, the canopy in the Redwater forest was so dense that most of the fallen tree logs and branches were untouched by the rain. And so, Berthold got a fire going while Ragnar carried 3 tree logs like they weighed close to nothing, then placed them around the fire as seating arrangements. Eleanor, using her elvish eyes and spectacular archery skills, managed to get a deer from miles away, with Berthold then preparing a meal over the fire for his companions. Eleanor grimaced, trying not to throw up. "Eat," Berthold said. "You've traveled so far without any food." Eleanor then removed a biscuit from her pocket. It was no more than the length and width of an average finger. She nibbled on the biscuit, saying, "This will suffice, Master Dwarf. We elves do not eat much." With elf, dwarf and werewolf sitting around a small fire, Berthold asked the burning question. "Eleanor," he said, almost shy that he spoke her name, "what do you mean by Ragnar being a special class werewolf?" Eleanor finished eating the biscuit, dusting off the crumbs from her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the white wolf, in absolute awe of the specimen in front of her. "I cannot believe it," she says. But now that I see it with my elvish eyes, the prophecy is true. The elves were the only race in the land that were viewed and deemed to be all-knowing, since they were the oldest. "Oh, is that so?" Berthold said. "Then respectfully, she-elf, how did you not know those bald men were vampires?" "Because those are not the vampires that originated from this land," she replied. "We know of them to look and to move differently." Ragnar spoke, and it startled Eleanor. She had not yet gotten used to his deep, menacing, monstrous voice.
Elves have not walked this land for more than a century. What are you doing here?
And so the Elf Lord explained while Berthold backed her up by telling the White Wolf of the elf party.
Very well,
Ragnar said.
If Berthold sees you as an ally, then I will too.
From ancient history to prophecies and bestiaries, they obtained knowledge like no other. The dwarf then politely asked Eleanor about the prophecy of the land, her knowledge of monsters, and Ragnar being a special class werewolf. "Very well then," she replied. "Where shall I begin?" Chapter 7. Vampires. Eleanor's inability to recognize the vampires in Cascada can certainly be excused, for vampires were rather different creatures when she was just a little elf. Long ago, there was a plague that struck the land that affected animals, but mostly bats. The chemicals in the air, when exhaled, altered the bats' DNA, transforming them into nightmarish creatures. Some said the plague itself was unnatural, siding more towards a curse put on the land. The bats grew almost 15 times their size, terrorizing towns and villages patrolling the skies at night. They became rabid monsters, driven by a bloodlust which led them to insanity. When the elves got word of these night creatures, an army was led to exterminate the vampires and keep human folk safe. It was also documented that whichever human these vampire creatures fed on would transform into the bat-like creature by the next nightfall. The elves fought bravely, but they were outnumbered, resorting to elvish intelligence to dictate the outcome of the battle. At that point in time, the vampire creatures moved at the speed of light, and their weakness was not yet known. However, when the elves soared through the air, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, their eyes witnessed the greatest weakness of these creatures. At dawn, when the sun pierced the sky, the vampires began burning and bursting into flames. Some of the bat-like creatures, the stronger ones, did not share such a similar fate. While their skin did burn, their bodies turned to ash without disintegrating, rather freezing them like statues. These statues today are known as gargoyles. Folk today regard them as spooky spectators of their towns and villages. But if one looks close enough, one would see the gargoyles' fangs and glowing red eyes peek through the ashen stone. Many years later, every land was free from those vampire creatures until the gods cursed a human, a faithful man that used to be a priest. He was one of the wisest, if not the most powerful priest that walked the earth. With his mere words and knowledge of the darkness, he would exorcise demons, sending them back to hell. In some cases, when the exorcism did not work, the priest would don his silver brass knuckles, anointed with holy oil, and physically beat up demons with his own hands. Then one day, a demon orchestrated the perfect plan against the priest. Why not give him a taste of the demon blood that he expels with ease? And so, despite knowing the priest would destroy the demon, the creature spat blood onto the priest's face before being sent into the shadows. Unknowingly and unintentionally, the priest swallowed some of the droplets of blood that made it into his mouth. Days passed and the nights grew darker, while the craving for blood intensified. Frightened and ashamed, the priest stood in front of the goddess Noctera, confessing his sin. Noctera, the moon goddess, was furious with the crime her most loyal servant had committed. In her rage during a blood moon, a time of great omens and a harbinger of death, Noctera cursed the priest to be a blood-drinking monster like the bat creatures in before's time. There was no description of the priest in terms of physicality in any book inside the elven library, but there was a name, Nazduk, meaning forsaken or the forgotten. That's all Eleanor knew of vampires since the stories of Nazduk, the vampire priest, vanished from the elvish lands just as quickly as they were created. Now the Elf Lord has witnessed it firsthand that the species of vampire has traveled to human DNA, something she greatly feared. Nevertheless, no vampire would ever be quick enough to avoid or dodge the Elf Lord's arrows. Furthermore, as long as there is sunlight, vampires would never win their battle, as light, seen as pure and life-giving, chases away that of darkness, seen as impurity and death. However, if the vampire monster DNA has mixed with human DNA, who knows just how much more these vampiric creatures could transform. Chapter 8. Werewolves. Natural-born werewolves have been common knowledge in every land, not only in this continent but all the others as well. The elves, however, being the oldest race in the world, know of two more categories of werewolf. Nevertheless, Eleanor began with the first class or grade. Natural-born werewolves are human men born with lycanthropy. It began as a curse, but the generational passing down is merely genetic. These men transform into large wolves during the presence of a full moon and only then. This transformation is excruciating, having their bones dislocate and sometimes break to mold into the creature that comes out at night. Natural-born werewolves most of the time pose no threat to human folk. They hunt and feed on animals while living in secrecy and isolation. Natural-born werewolves tend to find each other, forming a pack and protecting their home, i.e. Houndsville, the land of werewolves. Many telltale signs exist, such as abnormal hair growth, a unibrow, sharp teeth, dirt caked under fingernails, and a specific wolf-like odor from their bodies. These werewolves cannot and will not be bipedal creatures. With sometimes the exception of an alpha, they remain moving like normal wolves. Furthermore, they do not retain any of the human memories when transformed, only the animalistic instincts and lore of their hunting code and pack. Then there's cursed werewolves, which aren't widely known across the land with the exception of witches, since they were the ones responsible for creating such monsters. Cursed werewolves do not have a natural transformation, which means they are not born with lycanthropy, rather forced into it with false bravado and the belief of tremendous power. Witches conjure up potions, ointments, and spells to trigger this monstrous change. And since these men have already sold their souls to the dark forces, either through rituals or cult-like practices, they blindly accept. The ointments and potions only work at night irrespective of a full moon. Since metabolism is the lowest at night, these ointments take over the body by penetrating the skin follicles. However, when they transform into werewolves, they do not feel pain, as the potions mask the physical sensation that comes with it. Witches use these men to carry out their dirty deeds without getting their own hands dirty. Much like natural-born werewolves, cursed werewolves retain no memories from their human life, only their goal, mission, or task at hand given to them by the witch. They pose a great threat to humanity, not just in werewolf attacks and feeding rituals, but also in the manipulation of other human folk to follow the same procedures. However, unlike natural-born werewolves, cursed werewolves are far stronger creatures from the dark magic, and they are bipedal. They are rabid, fiercer, and driven by bloodlust. Then there are the special class werewolves, a category only known by the elves, heaven, and hell. Much like a cursed werewolf, the transformation only occurs through an incantation, not cast by a witch, rather by a demon. A portion of the demon's power performing the incantation is then transferred to the werewolf. Hence, the stronger the demon, the stronger the werewolf. These werewolves are always bipedal. They are more humanoid, not hunched like monsters, and are levels ahead in power and speed. Demons need these type of creatures in hell not only to wage battles against humanity, but aid in the destruction of heaven. They are mindless beasts, easy to control, easy to manipulate, and poisoned to carry out orders in the underworld. Though that aspect doesn't make them special, rare, or unique. The term special class instead came from breaking the incantation. 9 out of 10 times the one being cursed loses their mind and soul to the demon. But in that one time, the curse is either reversed to some extent or severely altered. If the one being cursed is strong enough to hold onto their memories and purpose, their mind isn't lost in the transformation process, thus allowing them to still speak fluently in their monster form. The only downside of the incantation is these werewolves can never revert to their human bodies, be it day or night, full moon or not. They are stuck in that werewolf form much like Ragnar lives in. Hell no any demon will have control over a special class werewolf, no matter how many times they may try. Unlike natural born and cursed werewolves, special class werewolves do not share a weakness for silver. The only way to defeat them is to take their head off, something that many have tried to do to Ragnar, and many have failed. However, with that being said, the reason special class werewolves were not common knowledge was due to the rarity of such a case. Special class werewolves were only mistakenly created if the prophecy was meant to come to light. Chapter 9. The Prophecy of the Land. There was once a prophecy that was written by the angel Jorah, a scribe and a loyal servant in the kingdom of heaven. However, her loyalty wavered when she meddled in the underworld. There was a young demon war chief who fell in love with Jorah, thus manipulated by him, changing the course of events the land would experience. Zalzar, the demon war chief, convinced Jorah that the creation of human folk was the biggest mistake in the universe. Angels, however, wanted to protect the land and mankind, while demons wanted to destroy it. Jorah then wrote a prophecy on an ancient stone tablet that would create monsters to battle against the angel army, monsters known as special class werewolves. Heaven did not know about Jorah's prophecy for a while, and when they did, they cast her out of heaven along with 9 other angels that committed treason in aiding in the destruction of humanity. These fallen angels were known as the Velzari, meaning banished or simply the fallen. Though they were cast out, the Velzari retained their angelic powers, but now worked for the domain of hell. The angels in heaven were unaware that Jorah had in fact taken the tablet with her, thus having the ability to write prophecies into existence. Through eons, the battles between angels and demons destroyed Earth more than once. Timelines were changed, life forms were altered, but the prophecy remained the same. Until one day, a young man who never skipped a day's prayer was spied upon by the fallen angel Jorah. She used him and manipulated him the same way Zalzar had done to her, convincing him to be a weapon in the destruction of hell. This young, innocent man was none other than Belru Caesar. Belru, unaware that Jorah was not a real angel anymore and blinded by his fate, chose to go forth with a plan. A demon would come down to the land and curse a man to be a werewolf, a mindless creature that would serve hell and build a monster army in the land. Jorah, however, told Belru not to worry, as he would retain all of his memories and infiltrate the domain of hell as one of their own. This was a lie, of course, as the prophecy stated nothing of the sort. But Jorah did not realize that her angelic powers were slowly being cast away from her damned soul. In turn, her spoken word, be it truth or lie, be it what she wanted or not, would be engraved into the stone tablet. Hence Belru Caesar, the first special class werewolf, was born, just as the altered make-believe version of the prophecy Jorah had spoken into existence. With Belru indeed retaining his speech, memories, and mannerisms, he did infiltrate Hell, decreasing the numbers of demons from the inside. The elves know not of the events that followed, for Belru Caesar was turned to stone on an island near this continent. And still the elvish records mention him being the strongest cursed being in all of existence, hence the demons turned him into stone, unable to kill him. But these demons were not part of Zalzar's clan. Rumor has it that 3 old men masquerade as wizards, pretending to only know magic. But the elves have reason to believe that the Wizards of 3 are actually the first demons in the domain, Asmodeus, Belial, and Beelzebub, which explains why they were strong enough to defeat Belru and freeze him for all of eternity. Now here's where things become rather interesting and terrifying. While not recorded in lore, some of the elves claim to know on how the prophecy had changed. Though this is mere speculation and should be taken with a grain of salt, some say Belru rewrote the prophecy before he was exiled, almost like he knew that he would lose the fight back then, but not the battle. He spoke the change of events into the tablet. 2 other special class werewolves would be born, one to dismantle the underworld and all the powerful beings that control it, the other to be worthy enough to find the stone tablet rumored to be inside a jungle, freeing Belru from the statue and aiding in the fight against evil. The elves also mentioned that Jorah got word of what Belru was trying to do at the time, thus implementing the werewolf trials tied to the stone tablet. That's all that she could change from Belru's prophecy, just before the tablet lost all connection to her. The werewolf trial states that Hell would only be destroyed if Jorah was defeated, a bold claim made by the fallen angel, now the demon queen of Hell. She's confident that she cannot be beaten, and the one who could come close has been turned to stone. So you see, Ragnar, Eleanor said, you are part of the prophecy. This gives me hope that we can win. What do you mean? Bertold asked. The Elf Lord explained that prophecies are either a hit or a miss. Most of the time they're fables told around a fire, as the trio have been doing. But one thing was indeed certain. Whether 3 werewolves of special class were born or not, monsters will come to the land and destroy it and claim humanity. It happened before and it will happen again. History has a habit of repeating itself. That is why Eleanor wishes to form an alliance with the dwarves. United, they can face the monster army heading towards the land. If more elves from the elvish lands receive word of how wrong they've been about dwarves, they could coexist, having the best warrior army ever seen. Elves for distance with their archery skills, dwarves for their barbaric, ruthless close combat techniques, and now an 8-foot-tall warrior knight turned werewolf who was more frightening and powerful than elf had ever seen, would make the strongest alliance that ever existed. Then the elf and dwarf bid farewell to the white wolf, as Bertold would now take Eleanor to the place that would be her home for the rest of her long elvish life. However, a great distance away, the trio had been watched for all this time by a being that has power like no other. Chapter 10. The Grim Reaper. Death closed his long spyglass and kept it away in his pocket. He stood on a mountaintop wearing his long black hooded cloak and scythe in hand. But he wasn't alone. Strapped and restrained to a rock was a demon known as Behemoth. The monster's legs were sliced off by the grim scythe, and that wasn't the scariest thing to happen on the mountain pass. The Reaper began picking up limbs from the ground and packing them away into a large sack. From hands, legs, fingers, toes, heads, even teeth, the Reaper made sure he picked up every last piece. Death always cleaned up the mess that he made, for those slaughtered limbs lying on the ground were caused by his scythe. The demon Behemoth led an attack against the land, an attack that wasn't passed through hell. None of them expected death to be there. While he continued picking up limbs from the ground, the demon spoke.
Why keep me alive, Reaper? For your amusement. You've slaughtered my fiends with so much ease. Why not deal the same fate to me?
The Grim Reaper hummed a tune the entire time, then walked towards Behemoth and flicked the demon's nose. He repeated what the demon said in a mocking type of way, then answered, "Oh, I could dismember you, you know, and I wouldn't need my scythe to do so. I could use my bare skeletal hands and have a field day with you. However, I need you. I need you to deliver a message for me."
I'll tell them you know. If you send me back to hell, I'll tell them that you interfered with the lives of humans. I'll tell them it was you who forged the alliance between elves and dwarves. You changed the signs of the towns and villages just so the elves could get lost. You led the elf party to the Red Water Forest because that's where the dwarf was heading. You created a storm to wake up the White Wolf, knowing he would hear the commotion of vampires in Cascada and see the elf party traveling to the land of Freya. I'll tell them everything.
Death sat in front of Behemoth with his legs crossed, his cloak blowing and flapping in the strong winds. And then he applauded. "You know, Behemoth," he said, "I've always taken you to be a dumbass, but that was brilliant. Truly and utterly brilliant. That actually saves me half of my monologue. Yes, you dumbwit, that is exactly what I want you to do. You will drag your demon body through the fiery pits of hell, what's left of it anyway, and you tell them everything that I've done here today. Oh, and the sack with the remains of your underlings. You drag that along with you and show it to my siblings. You tell famine, war, and conquest everything, okay? Oh, and before I forget, also tell them that because you broke the rules of natural law, no demon can ever walk this land for the next 100 years. Tell them that because of your malice, you have pushed back the demon's plans by a century." Suddenly, the half-bodied Behemoth was not smiling anymore. He would rather be slain by the hand of death himself than to tell Zelda that they would have to wait 100 years because of him. Death got up to his feet and told the demon that he would be right back. After a blink, the Reaper was already in front of him, like he never left in the first place. The Grim then cut the restraints of the demon and dragged him to the edge of the cliff. Below, in what seemed to be a freefall into the abyss, had a jagged slash through the earth. Slightly visible from above, Behemoth saw the flames bursting and lava crashing into the fiery pits. And so, Death tossed the demon off the cliff, followed by the sack containing dismembered limbs. The demon's scream of anguish and despair was soon silenced when he fell through the portal of hell. As the Grim Reaper snapped his fingers closing the portal, he walked away into the mountainous fog and whispered to himself, "So it begins."